to record the session. And we will start in about 1 minute.
Seeing a few familiar faces join us, very nice. Including one person, yeah. Somebody that I don't think I've seen for a little while there.
Okay, it's 12:02. For the want of time, the people attending here during lunch in Toronto and the Eastern time zone where we are in. So being respectful of the time, I'm going to start. So welcome everyone. This is the Toronto Meetup. We also have sister meetup groups that we have created in Washington, DC, Chicago, Boston, and Vancouver in Western Canada, where this event has been published. Survey participants from several of them, totally about 80 people registered, so quite a few will turn up. So thank you for all of you for being here today, and we are trying to strive to bring frequently good presenters from all across the world, especially the COVID situation has changed the availability of great participants, and we bring them from where they are. So today we have Ben Maynard, who is a certified LESS trainer from London, and he's been part of the LESS community, and we wanted to bring him today to talk about product ownership and how he, according to him, kills Agile at scale. Though I struggle with those words, I still don't know after 15 years what Agile means or scale means. Neither of those really have. Of course, we have a lot of derived meaning to that, but I still struggle with that. And that's why we are here, to see what Ben's perspectives are, and can we look through his lens and walk alongside him to look at it from his perspective, to look at it differently. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Ben.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for such a lovely introduction. Very, very, very kind. And yeah, it's funny you say that. I'm part of a LESS community. I was quickly trying to calculate how many years I've been kind of roughly part of the LESS community. And I think it's more than I care to count. Maybe as many as 6 or 7 now. I can't really recall. The talk today is my lovely clickbaity title, which is How Product Ownership Kills Agile at Scale. This is all based upon my experiences, predominantly working in large financial institutions over the last decade or so. I'm going to explain how I've seen product ownership gone wrong. And I think some of the misunderstandings that have come into the kind of role of product ownership, which has been born from completely understandable and completely fine roots, and people have created their own definitions of product ownership. But I think what I've noticed is that these definitions and the way that people often try to enact the role get in the way of them achieving really what they're capable of achieving when trying to kind of do Agile at a certain scale. Okay, so we'll start with the obvious start here to say who I am. So I'm Ben Maynard. My company is Sheave. I'm a coach, trainer, facilitator, mentor, like general human being doing stuff. But I'm also a certified LESS trainer. Have been for 4 years, and I think I've got the weird honour of being the UK's only certified LESS coach as well, for what it's worth. So my experience, a lot of the knowledge I have, it all comes from LESS. But I'm finding less and less that I actually kind of use LESS as a framework and use it more as a vision for what could be, rather than something for people to really try and use in earnest. So as a little starter for this, I thought I'd try and put some data into my presentations, and I looked at the State of Agile survey from 2019 to look at what it was saying around product ownership and scaling frameworks. And I was kind of surprised. I was first of all surprised that actually not many people responded to the 2019 State of Agile survey. I'm not quite sure if 1,300 people really contribute towards articulating what the state of Agile is. But still, 1,300 people responded. And what I found interesting was that very, very few of them were product owners or product managers, 6%, which didn't really meet my hypotheses on things, which I'll explain later. But what I did find interesting was more than half of the people said they chose Agile for business and IT alignment, some desire to get IT and the business working better together, which I think is something which is at the very heart of the Agile principles. And yet, with 64% of people choosing Agile for that purpose, 32% said there's a lack of business or customer or product owner kind of hindering success. So even though people are choosing Agile and choosing these different frameworks approaches to really kind of get themselves closer, to reduce some of the distance between the two people who are creating the software and the people that are buying it or using it, it isn't working for people. It isn't working for people, and I found that kind of sad. Also interesting, when you look at the number, the frameworks that are used, of course, SAFE has got a huge market share. But then I think this is where the State of Agile survey kind of breaks down, because it's kind of saying that Scrums is a scaling framework. I'm not really sure if I'd call it a scaling framework per se. And with less lingering down there at the bottom, which is absolutely fine by me. So I found this data interesting because some of the thoughts I'm going to share to you are really hinged around the misunderstanding and in some instances the proliferation of the role of product owner in organizations. And what we'll cover then are four main areas. Number one, the problems. So looking at the problems that emerge when product ownership kills Agile at scale. And what I'm talking about here is perhaps more killing the dream of it. It's getting in the way of people really getting the benefit from what they've chosen to adopt. We'll look at when a product owner is a boss. We'll look at the idea of product owner as a team player, as a servant leader, rather than being a manager of people. I'm going to share some little stories around there. I'll talk about something which is fundamental to product ownership and, in my opinion, fundamental to Scrum, right? Which is the eradication of dependencies through the definition of your product. And I'll go into much more depth on that. And then finally, we'll talk about relationships. The role of product owner, in my opinion, is one of relationship nurturing and building. And without understanding this and really focusing on some key relationships, any dreams of Agile will be lost. Now I'll overuse the word Agile. I try and kind of use it as little as I can do over the last year or so. But one thing I feel that just to caveat what I say is when I mention things like Agile principles, I very much see principles as what ought to be, something that we're going to strive for, something that could be, not a prescriptive set of principles and values. So, what are we talking about? So, whenever an organization increases in size, for whatever reason, like through acquisition, through a desire to grow, through hiring people, increase market share, it will always create problems that will need to be solved. It's just the nature of the beast. When we make things bigger, we'll end up with more dependencies, with more communication, and then we'll create problems to solve. Even when things are small and things are nice and easily contained, there's still problems to solve, and we amplify that when we grow organizations. And the role of product owner, when organizations choose to use Scrum or something which is Scrum based, or even when they just take certain labels and try and apply them to what they've already got. The one thing which is sometimes lost, and I think that people, for me, the goal when working with organizations is to make sure that the product owner role is valuable, that it's rewarding to the individual who is fulfilling that role, it's rewarding to everyone around them, including the rest of the organization and the customers. It's a key role and it's got very specific responsibilities and that should mean it is a valuable role to everybody. But when it's not executed or supported adequately, when it's misunderstood, when it's bent out of shape, when it is just a relabeling of what people already do, when people will look at an organization and they do copy and paste Scrum, where you have effectively many Scrum teams, each with their own product owner, each with their own Scrum master, like this copy and paste Scrum really hinders people's ability to be able to adapt quickly to change at a low cost at scale. Why is that? Well, one thing, coordination. When we take a very narrow view of product ownership and when we do copy and paste Scrum, so what I'm saying here is you have an organization full of Scrum teams, a Scrum team being the development team, the product owner and the Scrum master. When the organization is full of that copy and paste Scrum, that the products are so narrowly defined, each backlog is so probably going to have dependencies on other backlogs. That's going to create a coordination effort. And this coordination, every minute that someone's spending with a Gantt chart, with a report, if you've got project managers or some other kind of delivery manager overseeing it, trying to coordinate and synchronize all the work, it's a waste. I'm not saying it's unnecessary. I'm not saying that every organization can do without it, but it is a waste. It's something which we can avoid, because if you've got an organization, if I'm CEO, CTIO of a company, I want most of my money to be going to teams understanding or creating software, understanding the user needs or creating the software itself. And I want all my teams to be working on the highest value things from the organization's perspective. And what that means is if there's coordination, it gets in the way of all of that. It makes it very difficult to prioritize. It makes it very difficult to know where you are at any one given point in time. And if there is a coordination effort, it probably means that the teams aren't owning whole features. And coordination is a huge problem. Learning ability. When it's in, at the top, it was said, not really sure what Agile and Scale is. And it is hazy and it is fuzzy and it means different things to different people. But I think one thing which is apparent is that really agility in large part is about learning. It's about growing. It's about learning about your customers and your users. And if the product owner role isn't enacted in the correct way, then it hinders people's ability to learn. If the product owner takes on, let's say, takes on the role of proxy as a middle person who is between the teams and the people that want the software, then the person that's learning the most is a product owner when they're talking to the customers and users. If they're just handing over a backlog or handing over some items or some kind of document, which is their attempt to articulate what it is they believe the users wanted, then you're not allowing the teams who are going to be creating the software to really learn. So from a product owner perspective, acknowledging that there is time needed to learn, acknowledging that servant leadership is a great way and able to help people grow, is something that needs to happen. And often you don't see that. Often the product owner takes on too much control and hinders the organization's ability to learn. Flexibility. If we have many backlogs, each of their own product owner, simply it makes it very difficult for us to understand where the highest value item is. And because it's hard to find that highest value item for reasons that it's either hidden in a backlog or actually the high value item is split into various different technical pieces or their dependencies, then it means we have no flexibility. We're very rigid. If something new and very important came up and you want everyone to change direction, if you have many backlogs, because you haven't really kind of understood how Scrum should be used in an organization, but it's very difficult to change direction quickly. You have to work with many people in order to try and get some directional change happening. So what happens is that people avoid that, or they can't do that, and teams end up working on low value items. So that rigidity leads to low value work being undertaken. Oftentimes, from a product owner perspective, they're not seen as part of the team. Scrum is a flat organizational, it's not even an organizational structure. Everyone's at the same level. The product owner is part of that Scrum team, and the product owner is a peer to those people. Yes, they have other work, which is different to the work of the development teams, but they are still part of the team and they should behave as a part of the team. They are not a boss of anybody. They are a peer of the people they are working with. Oftentimes, the organizational goal is missed. Product owners are focusing on scope, they're perhaps focusing on analysis, they're deep down involved in the clarification. There's many backlogs, so it's very difficult to understand what the organizational goal is. Great product ownership is when you have a very tight relationship between how the product owner is directing the product and the organization's overall goals. And unless the product owner is supporting the organizational strategic direction, then there is a problem. And oftentimes when there are many, many product owners with many, many backlogs, having all of those people support a single organizational goal is a big problem and very hard to achieve. We have a Dunning-Kruger effect. Oftentimes product owners have been very good at what they've done, but they sometimes believe that they've learned everything that needs to be learned, that they have reached the pinnacle of product ownership and there's nowhere else for them to go. One pattern I see quite often is that product owners will feel like they've learned everything they need to learn, and now they want to build an empire. Now they want to build a team underneath them rather than learn more and find new ways of going about it. So having a misunderstanding of your own ability and the need to learn is a big problem, because, as I said before, in this kind of agile environment, learning is an absolute criticality. And lastly, the big problem is trust. If business people and developers are to work together on a daily basis to understand what the software that needs to be created, then that means that the product owner has to trust the team, has to trust the team and get out of the way and let the team work directly with those people. If you don't have trust, you go very slowly, because if you don't have trust and you as a product owner, you don't feel like you can step out of the way and let people talk and let people interact directly, then you're going to put into place proxies, documents, processes, and you're going to end up going slower because of a lack of trust. Now, all of these problems I've seen on a frequent basis in my travels through corporate life and investment banks, and I see it outside of investment banks. I see these problems in startups. I see them in non-financial institutions. They're rife. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. I see a number of things popping up in the chat, I believe.
Yes, there are a few questions, Ben. Would you want to pause and take some questions?
Absolutely. I'm happy to.
So, let's start with the first one from Waldemar. His question is, what do you recommend approach regarding product owner for 3 to 5 agile teams? Hard to have just one PO for all teams. Do you recommend one backlog for each team, and how to decompose work items?
Lovely question. And it's an easy one to answer from the perspective of a less trainer. If we were in a less course now, then I could answer that from a purely less perspective. And I could say that, well, Scrum says that you have a single product backlog and a single product owner, and the Scrum guide says that multiple teams often work from that single product backlog. It depends on, and from a less perspective, we would say that once you get up to around about 8 teams, it becomes a bit of a struggle for a single product owner to kind of keep all that in their head. In reality, it's a different challenge. It is a different challenge. So what I would say from the pure less perspective, yes, understand your product, which we'll come to in a second. It will be a single backlog, one product owner per backlog, unless you get to a point where it is too much for that single product owner. Less says arbitrarily 8 teams. You can find that's 5 teams, and it starts to get hard, and then you move into less huge, where you change the product owner a little bit and have different areas in the backlog and have product owners looking after separate pieces, each with a handful of teams in each. But split by customer requirement, not by technical specialism. I wouldn't ever recommend one backlog per team if you're all working on the same product. One sprint backlog per team, absolutely. Give the team autonomy as to how they manage their sprint backlog, how they get through the work, how they visualize it. But still one product backlog. And the decomposition of work items, what I'd say is, unless there's some interesting stuff around overall backlog refinement, there's some interesting changes to the LESS framework recently, over the last year, I think, around how backlog refinement is no longer a single team event, it's a multiple team event. So there's some great resources on the LESS website. And what I'll do is I will, before this session is out, I'll pop a few links into the chat window around refinement. Apologies if I haven't.
You posted a couple already in the chat window, right?
Oh, great. Nice one. It's always difficult to answer questions like this. I'm trying my best. But if you want me any further clarification, ask another question, or you can get me via LinkedIn, or if you've got my email address, it'll be on the presentation. So I'm happy to go into more detail on that. So there's no one here from Mara, I believe. What about product owners that report into one area of the organization and their stakeholders and users from other parts of the organization? Concept of a chief product owner. So from a less perspective, we wouldn't have a concept of a chief product owner. We have the concept of product owner and area product owner. Now, for me, this is again a fantastic question, and it really speaks to what is the product that you are working on. Because if in fact your stakeholders and users are in a different part of the organization, then like in the product owner can't work with them or can't interact with them, maybe is what's being implied. Then I think one of the big things that comes from less is that if I take a step back, when you're going through a less adoption, when you're considering the steps to go on, one of the absolute first thing you do after providing people some level of education is to look at the definition of your product. And I'll talk about this in a second, but then the definition of your product will ordinarily have quite a large structural impact on the organization. So when you see that actually there are these organizational boundaries which have to be transcended in order for the work to happen, it kind of implies that perhaps the organizational structure needs to change in some way to enable people to have that clear and easy communication. Which is why the definition of product, this is the one thing I do more than anything at the moment. When I'm talking to organizations and I go in and I listen to their problems and I'll do some exploration, and what it always comes down to is we need to take a fresh look at our product. We just don't understand our product. There's one client I've been talking to, they've been wildly successful, and they've done so well using a particular framework, and they've kind of hit a point now where they don't feel they can improve anymore. So they came to me and said, well, look, from a less perspective, what's it all about? And I took them through some of the pieces, and they're like, it's our product. It's just our product. We haven't thought about our software product enough, and the organizational change that comes back off the result of that. So I'll go into this in more detail, Mara, and everyone else, but I think that there is something here around organizational structure. There's something about definition of product. There's also something around here, unless we don't like the whole chief product owner thing. There is a product owner, and we try and change less as little as possible. That's why we try and change Scrum as little as possible, and we try and stick as true to that as we can do. How about I will answer one more, and then Nisha, I'll pick up from you shortly.
Yeah, we have a third question from Swati about, okay, it's more of a suggestion, using design thinking and co-creating solutions. She says that the way users be closer to the teams, and I mean, design thinking is one technique that can be used for sure. It's less of a question there.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can take another question from Magdalena. Wouldn't you say the problem with product owner is sometimes to define what a product actually is? Yeah. How broad can we go with this definition?
Absolutely. And you know, if you give, I will come to that after the next thing, and we'll go deeper on exactly that topic. Rather than that, because I think there'll be a nice kind of lead into that from the slides. So Magdalena, I will answer that question, and absolutely we can talk about some examples, and we can talk about the repercussions of that from an organizational perspective. There was one that I saw, a question which was I found quite interesting about how bringing the end customers and users closer to the dev team, often seen as a PO as a middle layer. Scrum 2.0 was talking about bringing the user to the team. So I like this question because I've got strong opinions on it. In my opinion, product ownership kills Agile at scale when the product owner becomes the middle layer. From a large scale Scrum perspective, the product owner should, as much as possible, deal with direction, not with clarification, because this is an Agile principle. Business people and developers should work together. Yes, they should work together, absolutely, and the product owner shouldn't get in the way of that, should build the relationship and let that happen. Now, one of the things which Craig Larman corrected, educated, coached me on when I was becoming a LESS trainer was when I was at the Royal Bank of Scotland. We brought somebody from operations into the team, and they were part of the team. Now, in my case study, I was saying that we had a user as part of the team. Now, Craig said to me, well, that means they're not a user. that they stopped being a user of the software the moment they joined your team. Now, they could have subject matter expertise, and that's a different conversation, but they ceased being a user the moment you stop them from using the software as part of their job. So my argument would be, you want that really close interaction between the teams and the users. You have to make that mutually beneficial for everybody. But the moment you take a user out from actually using the software as part of a job they're paid to do, then they're no longer a user. They may be a subject matter expert. And over time, in the short term, that's not a problem. In the medium to long term, they lose touch with the reality of doing a job or paying for like this piece of software. And that's where it starts to get a bit gnarly. One of the best, I say one of my favorite measures, right, to put into to suggest to an organization when they're thinking about anything along these lines and they're using something that's Scrum based, I say that incentivize the teams and the business by measuring the percentage of product backlog items that are used by the user in the sprint review. Because if you want to kind of get people working more closely and you want to get the users engaged, make it beneficial for them to want to get engaged. Measure people on the ability for the users to be in the sprint review and actually use the software. Because what has to happen in order for that to achieve that is huge. There's a whole amount of relationship building. There's a whole amount of understanding. There's a whole amount of acceptance. There's a whole amount of feedback that has to happen within the sprint for a user to feel comfortable to take hold of the mouse and actually use the software in the sprint review. And for me, like, there's all different ways, strings you can pull to get the people closer, but the PO is one of the biggest reasons, when it's done incorrectly, why it causes a problem when they act as that middle layer. Okay, if it's okay, I'm going to move on to some slides, and then I'll come back and pick some questions in a second. The one thing which I think is a great growth opportunity, and it's often sporadically handled in organizations, is that people think as a product owner, then you're supposed to be senior. And the thing is, with a lot of our traditional organizations, being senior means having an organizational hierarchy underneath you. You can't go up in an organization, a traditional organization, generally speaking, unless you've got people that report into you. So whilst I think that product ownership can kill Agile at scale, when a product owner becomes a manager, when they're having to manage other product owners or area product owners, when they become managers of, the classic is when they end up being managers of an analyst area, right? Because they think that that's what should happen. That will gradually erode away at the product owners' focus and their accountability on things. So what it does provide, though, is a huge opportunity for leadership. And I think from a product ownership perspective, if you want to help yourself succeed, this is a decent opportunity to exercise some real leadership skills. And by leadership, I mean give people a reason to follow you, not an organizational designed hierarchy where people are paid to follow you, because that's what it says in a PowerPoint presentation somewhere. So when a product owner is a boss, it makes things much more difficult, okay, for the reasons I mentioned before, and because it creates a whole heap of conflicts. Like, as a product owner, you may have to make the hard decision for some work to stop. Okay, you may say, this is no longer of value, this has to stop. That could impact people who are reporting into you as a manager. These may be people who you have set expectations with as to how they're going to progress in their career. But things are volatile. Things are uncertain, things will change. And if you've been working with someone, if I'm a product owner and I have an area product owner who's looking after a certain set of requirements, and I've said that this is your year, you're going to get that promotion, you're going to go up a grade, all you've got to do is just knock out this, hit this outcome, deliver this scope, and you'll do it, you'll get that promotion. And then I'm a product owner and I look at things 2 months later and I'm like, there's been a global pandemic and what they're working on just isn't valuable anymore. And the next thing I'm going to work on is completely not their bag. Right? I'm not saying that the product owner can't make those hard decisions. I'm saying it makes being objective and just passionate about it much more difficult when you have that relationship, when you have those expectations that are set. There is an argument, a conversation to be had around how much do you, from a product ownership perspective, do you have to balance economics with empathy? And I think this is a hard decision to make. And I think that the best, that Buzz Vodder summed it up the best for me and said, like, well, he said, you can't balance the two. And this is why he never says that a product owner prioritizes a product backlog. You know, the language that I think he decided on, the way that I interpreted his language, which I agree with, is that the product owner orders a backlog based upon their opinion. And sometimes that means you do have to make trade-offs because there is an element of empathy you have to put into play. But as soon as you have that relationship, that pastoral care over somebody from a managerial perspective, then it creates conflicts, you've got expectations to deal with, and it causes distractions. And all of these things get in the way of making the right decisions for the product and the organization. So product ownership kills Agile at scale in this way, because the product owner is no longer able to make some of the hard prioritizations, some of the hard ordering decisions that they have to make because of all the extra baggage that comes with having to manage people in a traditional hierarchical organization. The alternative to this is to employ servant leadership. The product owner should absolutely be a servant leader. There is nobody in an Agile environment, in my opinion, that should not be enacting a level of servant leadership. If you do this, people grow. If you do this, you change people's opinion of you. You're not in the way, and you can begin to help people make those decisions collectively, and not be the answer man, the person that never comes home for dinner, as David Marquette would say. So now to pick up Magdalena's question, product breadth. Like if you find yourself using Scrum or something that's Scrum-like and you are knee-deep in dependencies, then product ownership, as it is intended, can fix that. And what we're talking about here is product depth, product breadth. And this is what I mean here. It's like how broadly you define your product. So how many technical components are within your product will directly affect your ability to scale and reduce waste. So let's say, for example, if I keep it really brief, we've got a simple application, front end, some services in the middle, and a front end. Right? If we see those as 3 separate products, we're going to have 3 separate backlogs. Like none of those teams will be able to own a whole feature because each of them are dependent in some way upon one another. The only teams which could really conceivably actually have a meaningful conversation with the users are the people who are on the front end team. What it also means is then that the valuable things that the customer or user wants are split down to three different discrete technical tasks. And so then if we're saying, well, hold on, this feature we thought was a hot type, if I'm a chief product owner and I'm looking after all the other product owners who are doing all their individual narrowly defined products, which are just technical backlogs, I can't turn around and say, well, here's a brand new feature. Let's stop work on 2, 3, and 4, and here's a new one, because you don't know where 2, 3, and 4 are. They're all ordered differently. They're all doing things in a different order. We can't integrate our software product frequently, so we don't know really where we are at any one point in time. Any desire to actually have an end-to-end feature cycle time of less than, let's say, the length of a sprint is a dream. It will never happen all the time you have those dependencies. And there is an important distinction to make between releasing every 2 weeks and actually releasing a valuable product increment every 2 weeks. A very distinct difference. So first of all, look at what your product is. If a Scrum guide says that the teams deliver a valuable product increment, that implies that those teams any one team is working on a feature. So if a team is working on a whole feature, then that means they haven't got any dependencies. So what that means is, from a Scrum perspective, if you have dependencies, teams aren't working on features, and anything that you have a dependency on should be part of your product backlog. So then if we begin to say, okay, dependency there, and we begin to eradicate those dependencies and bring all the work together to make whole features again, then we've got a much leaner, focused product backlog, which is from the customer's perspective. We've killed all the dependencies, so all of the waste, the processes, all of our lives that are taken up, are consumed by all the waste that we've created in regards to that, can be spent doing something more meaningful. And by going through this process, you have to begin to look at, well, we have a software product, sure. Now, does this support one or many business products? and you begin to have all these really interesting conversations. And this is from when looking at large-scale Scrum, this is the first thing that we do. We educate people around product, and we look to see what that product is. If your product isn't broad enough, as I implied a second ago, feature teams are nothing but a dream. A feature team is a team which has no dependencies upon anything else to deliver something of value to the customer. Right? No dependencies on anything else. And that's a tough call. That's a really tough call. And in large organizations, I've worked at Royal Bank of Scotland, I've worked at Deutsche Bank, really truly having true feature teams by that definition, right, was impossible in the short or medium term, maybe at some point in the future. But it was truly impossible because of the way the organization was structured. But that doesn't mean that people can't call themselves feature teams if they want. It doesn't mean that it isn't something that people should work towards if it helps them achieve their organizational goals. But unless your product is broad enough, you simply won't be able to do feature teams as it was intended. What you also get from very narrow products is duplication. You get duplication in logic, you get duplication in function, you get duplication in feature, because each of the backlogs are very narrow. Each narrowly defined backlog has their own product owner, and they're doing what they think is best. But in order for us to then make sure there is no duplication, we then have to add layers of process, of policy, of trying to create transparency, of trying to have committees and forums and scrum of scrums and scrum of scrums and meta scrum of scrums and whatever else we want to chuck on there, just because we've kept things too narrow. We increase the complexity, or we don't bother, and we just end up having people write software which they don't need to write. So we get a huge amount of duplication if we don't define the product broadly enough. And then lastly, but by no means least, it makes it very difficult to really truly prioritize anything if you haven't got a broad product. Less as an organizational design is designed as such, and it's in a certain way, so that it enables organizations to always work on the newest found item of value. And have all the teams you need working on that newly found highest value item. And you can only truly do that if you have a very broadly defined product with whole features on it. Otherwise, the bits that make up the different things of value are hidden amongst n number of different product backlogs. If you do manage to kind of say, okay, well, let's all change direction, let's all shift this around and work on feature number 6, then you have to talk to, say, 8 different product owners to make sure that they're all ordering their backlog in the same way. That means they're all having to stop different pieces of work. This is a huge amount of cost. And I think one of the things which is, I think the organizations tend to kind of get wrong is they think that, oh, great, we'll use Scrum and we'll take on board some of this. And look, we can change direction now. And they can change direction in a slightly easier way, but it costs them so much. It costs them so much to change direction that sometimes it just isn't worth it. So the breadth of your product definition, if it isn't defined broadly enough, and this is the role of a product owner to do this, then it can kill any dreams you've got of really being able to turn on a dime for a dime and work on those newly discovered highest value items. And it all directly correlates to your product breadth, which, if for those of you that want to research it, really does come down to queuing theory. So I will pause. And should we take some questions?
Yeah, we have a couple of interesting questions. Maybe we can do it a little out of order.
Yeah, go for it.
Another question from Magdalena, which is very relevant to your dependency conversation. So she asks, what if some point turns out we have one product and the company is 500 plus people? Do we apply less huge at this point? And she says there might be huge dependencies. Yeah,
no, it's a big one. I think 500 people organizations is I generally work with 500 people organizations within organizations which are much larger. So 500 people is a good number of people. It's interesting. You've got 500 people. Are they 500 people that would actually be creating software and understanding software? Or is it more like 200 people and 300 people supporting those people, which is kind of a sad fact of it often. But yes, conceptually, you are talking about less huge there because you have that many people. However, the way that it is advised that people adopt less huge is an incremental evolutionary way, using empirical data to make sure you're making the right decisions step by step. So what we're going to say is, let's find a batch of 50 people. Let's go through some product definition. Let's understand what our ideal product is, which maybe is all 500 people. We say, okay, that's not feasible. That is not realistic right now. Let's actually look at what a feasible initial product is. Let's put some boundaries around that. Let's understand the definition of done. Let's get a batch of, say, no more than 50 people, and let's learn about it. Let's master it. But let's get really good at doing this with a small batch of people. And when we feel like we've learned enough and it's the right time to expand, then let's bring in another set of requirements and another batch of people. And you evolve it and you grow it. But it is naive and foolhardy, if any framework, to suggest that that level of organizational change can happen in one go. It's just too much, especially when, if it's that big, things are going to be complicated, probably complex, and you're not going to be able to determine the cause and effect. You have to learn. And what I always say to my clients and people that I teach less to is that like when I was younger, I really, really wanted to be I wanted to be like as fit as Bruce Lee. Or for a while I wanted to have like a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was just like, yes, that's what I want. And so what I would do is I would look at that and I'd buy a book or watch a video, watch Pumping Iron, but right, I'm going to do it. And I'd knacker myself, an English phrase. I would tire myself out, I'd injure myself, I'd get it wrong and I'd quit because it didn't work for me. Right? And what it dawned on me later on in life actually was that I was doing it all wrong. Right? And so what I do now is if I want to be able to run a 10K in less than 50 minutes, I don't go out there and say, well, I'm going to do it. And I don't go and copy like great runners. I look at what they're doing and I learn, I look at what they're doing principally. I look at the kind of things they're doing in their journey to get there. And I try and begin to replicate some of the behaviors and see what works for me. And I might never get to that point where I look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or I'm Bruce Lee or I'm running 10K in less than 50 minutes. But I get better every time I try something different. And because I'm trying something different, I'm finding out what works and what fits into my life, then I persevere with it. And this is the same with less. If you look at less or less huge and say, that's what we're going to have, you'll fail. Like you won't get there. Like a perfect less adoption doesn't exist. But what does exist are people who look to less and look to it as a framework and say, we would love to get there. Now let's take what less says is the bare minimum we need to get started, and let's get learning and let's figure out what's right for us. And let's, as we can, evolve and grow and learn and try and move towards this idea of perfection. And if we ever get there, then we'll be sad, right? Because we won't know what to do next. But it's something to motivate. It isn't something to kind of look at and say, that's exactly what I want. So with less huge and you've got more than, you've got 500 people, it's incremental, it's evolutionary. And as you grow, you eradicate those dependencies. But you do it slowly and carefully based upon evidence. And you do it based upon what you as a company want to optimize for, not just the blind goal of we must copy what the less framework looks like or copy the big picture from SAFe, because by and large that doesn't ever work.
It's more like a yogurt starter culture. That's all it is. And you have to make your own yogurt with it.
Exactly.
So I had a couple of other questions related to what you're talking, Ben. Both are from Waldemar, and we look at it together. One is his question is, should the PO be from the client organization? What do you recommend when the PO is not full-time, like for example, a busy executive doing various things? And the second question is, how do you differentiate or explain the difference between order and prioritization of a backlog? Folks talk about priorities. If you have several reasons, criteria to make decisions, how to order the backlog. So
yeah,
take them on.
I'll answer the first question. There is some guidance on the LESS website around product development types. which talks about 3 different types of product development and the type of product owner that you should have in each of those 3 different types. So sometimes your product owner is in a client organization. Sometimes the product owner is the equivalent to someone who is a lead user. So if you're internally building an internal HR platform or something, then maybe it's like a lead user. If you are developing something on a project basis, and it's like you've got a feature, you've got a project, someone's come to you, can you do this for us? Then yeah, having a product owner in the client organization is probably the right thing to do. But then you've got more traditional product development where you have external customers and you have somebody internal who is maybe an executive or some visionary, someone who wants to do the job, and they are defining the direction of the product based upon feedback and ideas that are coming internally, but also the behavior of the market. So there's 3 different ways in which product owner can work, and from less is the less product development type. So we'll give you some answers to that. Big topic though, not easy to gloss over. So look at the LESS website. Any questions, give me a shout. The next question is the question that if I ever had to get in front of the TAC, as it were, for the Scrum Alliance and go for CST, this is the one I'd probably fail on. There's difference between ordering and prioritization. And the way that I always see it, and I'm sure that there's some great articles out there, and I feel slightly embarrassed that I probably will answer it incorrectly. But sometimes there is an order in which the way the work should be done that may not strictly relate to the priority that's been assigned. So if the priority is based upon a narrow value judgment, which doesn't take into account technical feasibility and learning, then you can end up with a prioritization order, which doesn't match the order in which it is maybe more optimal to deliver those parts of the product, if that's making sense. So you may want to order things differently because the team want to learn something, or it might be checking the feasibility of something, or it might just make sense technically to do to go Y, X, Z rather than X, Y, Z, because it just makes Z a bit easier if you do it a different way. But I would also look at things and say, well, people should have a very broad definition of what value is. Because yes, there's return on investment, but I mean these are all made up numbers. These are all just stuff we're making up. And the thing is, I think a lot of the time is that people think it's really difficult to measure things that are intangible because they're trying to get certainty. So they won't take into account learning, skills growth, capability growth. They won't take into account things that might be easier in 6 months as a result of doing this thing now, because that's harder for people to take into account on a value computation. So maybe then there is a difference in prioritization and ordering, but I always encourage people to take a broad view of it, because ultimately this is, we're very good at humans as making short-term decisions. It's very difficult to make medium to long-term decisions, and I think that from a conceptual perspective, prioritization or ordering, you could argue are the same. You could argue there's a distinct difference. Whatever happens, you need to, if to be successful, you have to find a way to balance the short, medium, and long term in whatever you're taking into account. Have your order in the backlog. If you don't do that, then you'll struggle. You'll struggle, which is why in LESS we don't like projects that much, because they are myopic. They are very short-sighted. It's all about up until the project ends, and then lo and behold, the software lives on, and someone's got to support it, or someone needs to grow it, but the project team has disappeared. So I think that there is a difference between prioritization and ordering. I believe it's due to the cold hard value calculation and maybe the order in which you may want to do stuff, ignoring that. Whatever happens though, you need to make sure that as a product owner, you're setting good, clear direction. And one of the most successful teams I've ever worked with, the product owner barely prioritized anything, barely ordered anything, because the team were doing it day in, day out with the users. And they were really successful as a result. Hundreds of millions back onto the balance sheet of a large bank as a result of the work they did was testament to the prioritization and ordering they were able to do directly with the user. If it's okay, I'm just going to cover the last topic and then share some tips. And if we've got any time, then I'm happy to field some more questions. Is that okay? So the last thing we want to cover is relationships. When I work with one particular startup I'm thinking of, you know, they were, when it was just one team working on stuff, it was fine. Like they got stuff out, the role of product owner was easy. Life was simple. When they scaled up, it became much crunchier. It got a lot more challenging. And part of the problem when you reach a certain scale, so I'd say more than one team really, is that there is not enough attention paid from a product ownership perspective on caring and tending to relationships. Oftentimes, if you're in an organization where there is some level of project hangover, you've still got projects in place. You've got project managers who do too much of the relationship management and nurturing, like where the product owner should be filling that gap. So when I hear a situation where they've got a product owner and then they've got a project manager, and I'm talking to the project manager and they're like, yes, I talk to the business about progress and I talk to the business about what's coming up next year. And I talk to the product owner and they're like, do I need to care about progress? Like, do I need to worry about what comes up next year? Like, because of the way that sometimes organizations are structured, because people don't understand the role of product owner and these important relationships which are theirs to own, grow and nurture, like it kills any dreams of really being successful at scale. And these relationships are the following, and I'll go over them at relative speed. Again, this is all on the LESS website and also available in the third LESS book, which I've already got beside me, which is a very good book. Higher management, product owner needs to keep the product funded, keep the product going in the right direction and support the organizational strategic direction. So having strong relationships with higher management is a must. The product owner should have good relationships with the users and customers, understand the market, understand the users, like gain empathy and understanding for them so they can set the right direction. Should have a strong coaching relationship with the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is there to help the organization achieve their goals via Scrum. It's there to help the product owner make sure that they can achieve maximum return on investment. So having the Scrum Master able to support the product owner meaningfully is a massively important relationship. There's another talk I've got around, it's called Politics Master, because oftentimes the Scrum Master is seen as this lowly subordinate junior role of the supreme chief product owner at the top. So any effective relationship between those two is structurally just not going to happen. Right? But that's a really strong relationship, and you want a great Scrum Master, a great product owner, a really powerful team. When I was at Deutsche Bank, I was a Scrum Master, I was a director, right? And the product owner was a director. We were peers. We worked really well together. We supported each other massively. That wouldn't have happened if I was much lower down the organizational hierarchy. LESS doesn't support organizational hierarchies, for the record. That was just a situation that we found ourselves in. Product owner needs strong relationships with the teams, right? Because they've got to step up the way, let the teams do the clarification, let the teams do some of the ordering, let the teams manifest the destiny. Because if you're a product owner of 8 teams, 5 teams, 6 teams, you can't be involved in all the day-to-day clarification work. So you've got to build relationships, you've got to build trust. And finally, and this is my favorite relationship out of all of these, the product owner is responsible for building and nurturing the relationship between the users and the customers and the teams. Not just saying, teams, go and talk to the users, it will all be wonderful, and letting them go off. No, it may not work that way. Right? This product owner should be building the relationships between them both and helping the team and pick up some relationship building skills, helping the team and users build prioritization skills so they can begin to step out the way and really focus on the higher order systemic optimizations. Because product ownership kills Agile at scale, kills success of doing this at scale when the product owner can't make those higher order systemic optimizations of what's happening. And these relationships are fundamental to achieving that. So we've covered all 4 areas at breakneck speed. Some tips that I want to give you. These are things I've spoken about. Number 1, define broadly. Right? There's a guide for this in the large scale Scrum book. It's well worth reading. It's a practice that I cover in my online LESS practitioner course. I do it in my in-person practitioner courses, but obviously they're not really happening much at the moment. But in my online LESS practitioner course, we go through product definition, and we look at that and we understand it. You know, I do this workshop with many organizations to understand what their software products are. Look at the focus on the 5 relationships. If you're a Scrum Master and you want to support a product owner, help them understand these relationships. If you're a product owner and you're worried about it, find someone to support you in building these relationships. They're absolutely critical. And lastly, servant leadership. Servant leadership from a product ownership perspective should never be underestimated. Should never be underestimated. And I think this is something which we often forget. So the product owner as a servant leader is a great way to untap some of the potential you've got in the organization. So thank you for listening. I hope you've got something from it. You'll get this deck. I've sent it across. Hopefully you'll get it. I've got a mailing list if you want to sign up to it. Also, very quick, shameless bit of self-promotion if that's all right. I've got a course coming up. There's a little code there if you want to get 20% off. It's called Provisional Less Practitioner. It may have a name change soon. There's nothing provisional about it. It's the same material, it's the same content. You get access to the books, you get a certificate because people really care about certificates, and you get to spend lots of time talking to me and those other great people. So if you're interested, you want to come along, there's some details and a link there. And that's me in black and white.
And I will send it out along with the YouTube video. The deck will be sent out to everyone.
Thank you very much.
So a couple more questions if you have a couple of minutes to take those. Ben, Aaron Ray has a question on CapEx and OpEx. More around the CapEx, how much of this function, so he talks about the mismatch between enterprise CapEx and portfolio approach. If you don't handle it that way, then the problem around clearing out negative returns in product portfolios.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you, so that really takes me back to my a lot of my experience working in large banks, right? Where as much as possible, let me stop sharing my screen. We try to avoid as much of the aggravation of dealing with this as possible. I think that a portfolio approach, right? And I think that's the thing I'll pick up on here is the idea of portfolio. And I can see that Aaron, hello. We haven't got time to embark on a full-blown conversation about this. Get me on LinkedIn and we can have the full-blown conversation, or we can set something up because I'm happy to get into it. But it's this idea of portfolios. Oftentimes portfolios are self-inflicted wounds through narrow product definitions. Like having a portfolio of products, valuable. If you put thought and effort into it, that's fantastic. When you've got a portfolio of projects, that's a self-inflicted wound, which comes with a huge degree of financial reporting turmoil, which is very, very difficult to unpick. So it's a great question. And the requirement for a portfolio approach is one which I think with time and through conversation we could explore in more detail. But if I give you the hardline, less kind of Craig Larman answer, portfolio management is a self-inflicted wound, which basically means that you define, you either got projects or very narrowly defined products, both of which can theoretically be avoided with a bit of will and determination. One thing that I have found incredibly useful when adopting less in large organizations is having a really amazing COO. There was one COO I worked with in 2 different organizations. He's absolutely legendary. He gets less inside and out, and working closely with him, the stuff we were able to achieve was phenomenal. But he's also a phenomenal COO, and I think, and that's what makes a difference. Like, get your COO on board with this type of stuff because they can be a huge, huge assistance.
There's also another question, probably the final one from Jeff Irving. He says that I found there's a complicating factor when the product has to include integration with purchase products and not simply shared code base. Can you speak to how the product owner flexes in that situation?
Sadly, yeah. If you're interested, Jeff, there's a case study on the LESS website for Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS. So you notice how my voice has dropped and I sound like I want to end it all or something. Because this was my LESS case study basically. Oh, there you go, Jeff. I can see you. Hello, mate. I've been looking at you. There you are. Yeah. So when I was working at RBS, we had spent a long story short, we'd written a system. It was a bit shit. Excuse my language. So it was going to be decommissioned by a vendor platform, which we'd have to customize, and we have to integrate with other areas of the bank, which were off the shelf and also hand woven. And it was an incredibly difficult challenge. It was an incredibly difficult challenge to work with a vendor platform, to then write our own code around it, to integrate it, to work with integration to other areas. At that time, I was playing the role of a fake product owner because I wasn't a real product owner. I was a fake product owner. But one thing that did give me the ability to do was to help give the team breathing space to focus on a couple of things that really made a difference. And the biggest thing that made a difference for us then was using specification by example. Because what we found was that by defining our interfaces and our requirements as executable specifications, it afforded us a lot of flexibility and predictability, which enabled us to deal with the fact we had very little ownership of what was coming about. So did I have to flex the role of product owner? Do you know what? I don't think I did. I don't think I did. But I think that when you look at the relationships that I was building and nurturing, you could stick vendors on there as one of the relationships that I really had to work on growing and nurturing, because without the vendors, I was nothing in that instance. So it's a very gnarly problem. If you take a look at my less case study for Royal Bank of Scotland, I'll put the link in there. If anybody wants to chat about that, more than happy to have conversations about that offline or as a small group.
Great, thanks so much.
Pleasure. One other thing, sorry, just like we were told of this vendor platform, but no one had ever done automated testing on it. It was impossible. Right, you can't do automated testing on it. It was called Calypso is the platform, or is it the other, as Goyko Adzik calls it, Apocalypso, or in RBS we call it Collapso. But they were telling you can't do automated testing on it. Can't do it. It took us 3 weeks to get automated testing working on it. And that was only because we had great people who were empowered with the right space and the freedom to explore things and challenge each other. And it's because of that we did things which we were told were not possible. And that wasn't me as a product owner, other than giving them the space. That was great people with support and freedom, right? That's what made the difference in that instance.
Okay, thanks.
Pleasure. Pleasure. Right, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, there's. I think that's the set of questions, Ben. I think we have come to an end of it. People have started dropping off because their lunchtime is nearly over here. So
yeah. My parenting time is just beginning. So
thank you very much for being here, and perhaps we should bring you back for a follow-up meeting so people can jump in with more questions. One day, I think I have a lot of suggestions that people wanted to ask you more questions, maybe discuss, even get you to present your case study on how we went about it one day.
Yeah, no, happy to oblige, more than happy to oblige.
Yeah, so we'll certainly take that into consideration, and I'll work with Ben to see whether we can bring him back at an appropriate time to more have a deep dive into the work that he did and talk about it, so we can get some context through that lens. So thank you, Ben. It was lovely having you today. On the other side of the pond, of course, there were a lot of people from Europe as well, but we had a great North American participation today. So thank you for being here and presenting.
Thank you for the invite. I loved it. And I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you again. Cheers.
Bye then.